The regular season in fantasy football is officially in the books, and we are turning the page to look forward to the 2026 offseason. That means dynasty, that means rookies, and we're going to talk all about it on today's new show at the Dynasty Stock Market right here on Player Profiler. What's going on, folks? Pete Nova here with Player Profiler, and I am super excited. I'm kicking off the new season because really for us fantasy football players, we're already transitioning into a new season. If you are a dynasty football player, like many people that are subbed to the channel and many people that follow me, and if you're watching fantasy football content at this point in the year in early January, right, you're probably a sicko that is in love with dynasty, right, and loves football and understands that it's a year-round thing. The NFL does not stop, right? And that's the beautiful thing about dynasty is dynasty's never stopping, right? There's always going to be news that's going to move markets, move player values, and it's going to change a lot of things. And we are here to capitalize on those knee-jerk reactions in the market right here with the Dynasty Stock Market on Player Profiler. This is going to be a new show that I will host this offseason. Some things that you can expect in this show. We're going to talk about 5 players in the past week, right, that are the most traded currently in Dynasty. So it'll give you a feel for, hey, these are the players that are being moved the most, and what do we consider them? Do we consider them buys? Do we consider them sells? Or do we consider them holds? So we're going to go over the data of those top 5 players. We're also going to take questions from you guys in between players about, dynasty questions, redraft, whatever kind of questions you might have, right? Ideally dynasty related, but if not, I'm happy to take those questions anyway. But we're going to go over those 5 players, right? Analyze their profile, their production, their insulation, right? Their current situation and how insulated that is, and kind of review some trades as well that have gone on between these players. So I'm super excited to kick off this new show. Make sure you hit that like button and you hit that subscribe button if you are not already. It would very much help us out and very much appreciate it. I'm going to answer some questions, but I do want to take a look at the chat here. We got Cameron Myers in the house. We got Jamie. What's going on? Dynasty Dave. What's up, Dynasty Dave? How we doing? And Cameron already sent in a super chat, and it is a question regarding Noah Gray. So Cameron says, what are your thoughts on Noah Gray? And I'll answer this question first before I kick off into the first player that we're going to discuss today. But Noah Gray, right, is a tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, if you're not familiar. And look, Travis Kelce could be on the way out. So I think many people are trying to figure out, is there an opportunity to go and find that player that Kansas City is going to replace that production from Travis Kelce with? And, some people might say, hey, go get Noah Gray, right? It could be a nice, cheap buy opportunity. He should not cost a lot if you are going out and acquiring him. I would be honest with you, the most I would spend on Noah Gray if I was going to, go out there and try to acquire him is probably like a 4th round pick. I wouldn't spend any higher than a 4th on Noah Gray. There's definitely some opportunity there with Travis Kelce possibly leaving. This past year, he had 37 targets. The year before that, 49, 41 the year before that. So, he's had at least 30 targets in the last 4 seasons, each and every season. He's 26 years old. Was drafted in the 5th round by Kansas City, 6'3", 240 pounds. But when I think about Noah Gray, I'm not super excited to go out there and acquire him. I understand that it's a kind of a speculative acquisition, right, to go out and get him because you think, look, if Travis Kelce's leaving, that production's got to go somewhere. I would not be surprised if Kansas City dips their toe into either free agency or the draft. Kyle Pitts is going to be a free agent. They have a completely new staff coming in, new front office. They're not married to Kyle Pitts, so there's no allegiance to them bringing him back. That's a possibility. I do worry, I don't know how much it's funny, right? We sit there and say, I don't know how much Kyle Pitts would fit into Andy Reid's system, but Andy Reid would make it work, right? I mean, when you look at talented players, Andy Reid will find, places for him. Travis Kelce, one thing he was great at was being a blocker. Kyle Pitts is going to be a guy that's not lined up in line. He's going to be, really more in that slot role. And so we'll see. Maybe Kyle Pitts is an option. David Njoku is probably a better ideal fit. I believe David Njoku is a free agent. Let me go take a look because Player Profiler, we do have the contracts listed. And actually, speaking of Noah Gray, let's take a look at his contract before we go to David Njoku, because I got to think that Noah Gray's contract is coming to an end soon, unless he re-upped. Oh, here we go. I don't know. I'm scrolling all the way down for his contract. 3 years, $18 million. Signed that in 2021. Okay, so 4 years, 2021. Okay, so he becomes a free agent in 2027. So he must have got some sort of possibly some sort of extension, right? This needs to be updated. But so yeah, I mean, Noah Gray, interesting. Like I said, I think I would probably maybe pay a fourth for him. If they don't go out there and pay for somebody, go sign anybody, there's definitely a possibility his dynasty stock goes up. But let's just take a look at David Njoku for a second. 29 years old. Tight ends age really, really well. I believe, and I'm scrolling down again for him as if I didn't just realize, Noah Gray, that the contracts are up here. Yeah, so David Njoku is a free agent. I think he would be a really, really nice addition for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think he makes more sense than Kyle Pitts. To kind of put a bow on this, and we'll move on, and I appreciate the camera in the super chat. I don't necessarily think that Noah Gray is a guy I'd be paying up for. I think if you have a lot of draft capital and you have a fourth that you can throw around, Noah Gray for a fourth would not be the worst thing in the world. I don't know if the manager will take it. It seems like Travis Kelce's done, but weirder things have happened, right? But it's hard. If Patrick Mahomes didn't tear his ACL and they missed the playoffs this year and he was going to be back, Patrick Mahomes week 1, I could see maybe Kelce being a little bit more motivated to come back. But, with the possible transitions next year, I think there's a good chance Kelce's done. But I do appreciate the question. So let's go ahead and get to our first player. And it's the first player that we're going to talk about. It's actually a tie between two players that have been the most traded players in Dynasty over the last 2 weeks. And it's Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brian Thomas Jr. Two juniors, both traded the most in Dynasty over the past 7 days. Actually, that doesn't look too good. Let me pull myself back up. But where did I have myself? I think I had myself oh man, now I can't get myself back. Oh man, talk about production quality. This is peak. Here we go. We'll just stick with this. But Marvin Harrison Jr., it has been a really, really polarizing player to talk about. And Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brian Thomas Jr. have been both traded 98 times over the past 7 days in Dynasty. The most traded players currently in fantasy football for Dynasty. And Marvin Harrison Jr., look, there's so many questions around the Arizona Cardinals this offseason, right? We have the possibility or likelihood of Kyler Murray not being there, right? I mean, I think that's a very, very strong possibility that Kyler Murray's gone. So you factor in Kyler Murray and the quarterback situation is changing. It's probably a good thing for Marv, not a bad thing. We saw this offense open up with more of a pocket passer like Jacoby Brissett. But factoring in, it's probably a new quarterback and a new system, right? New front office, new head coach. the front office isn't changing. Color me shocked. Same front office that traded with the Houston Texans, and they did get a haul, but they ended up giving up a top pick to the Houston Texans a couple of years back for not Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson. But you're talking about a new coaching staff coming in, and it should help. But the elephant in the room here is Michael Wilson, right? You have Michael Wilson, you have Trey McBride now, right? When Marvin Harrison Jr. was drafted to this team, you sat there and said, yeah, this guy's going to be the alpha. And he just hasn't been. When we look at Marv, college-wise, yeah, dominator rating, 95th percentile, 47.9%. But, the production hasn't been there, and he struggled to stay healthy this year, right? Only played 12 games. A lot of targets in 2024. We talked about Marv's rookie season, and a lot of people, felt like Marvin Harrison Jr. was terrible his rookie year. I really didn't think that was the case. I just think, and I talked about it with Matt, but I just think that we overdrafted Marvin Harrison Jr., especially in redraft, where, it was kind of a letdown. But when you look at these numbers, 885 yards, 8 total touchdowns, for a rookie is pretty good, right? On just 62 catches. This year, he obviously regressed. That was mainly due to the injuries. If he was out there when Jacoby Brissett was slinging the ball, his probably would have had a better year than he did his rookie season, because they were just throwing the ball a ton there over in Arizona. So, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a tricky player, right? With Michael Wilson, I think that's really the more important player to look at, is Michael Wilson. And can Michael Wilson, can Michael Wilson continue what he did, right? Was it a fluke for Michael Wilson to, go out there and absolutely explode on the field and be one of the best fantasy wide receivers down the stretch this season? And I think it's very, very possible that Michael Wilson is the number one wide receiver. Now, if we're eliminating Trey McBride from the equation, if Trey McBride doesn't count, then I would say Michael Wilson has a case for being that number one wide receiver. And the reason I say that is because he showed alpha type of stuff, right? Marvin Harrison Jr. just didn't, right? He played kind of soft, right? That was one of the tough things with him. Like, the contested catches just were not there for Marvin Harrison Jr., right? When he would go up and as a big body wide receiver, when he would go up for passes, right, that were contested, it just wasn't there, right? Contested catch rate, on 17 targets, he caught 47 of those passes, right? 38th in the NFL. Now, contested catches, that's kind of like it's not super sticky, right? It's not something that we're going to sit there and hang our hat on and say, yeah, because of the contested catches being down, Marvin Harrison Jr. just is not going to be good for fantasy. But when we talk about alphas, when we talk about players that we can see taking over a room, Marv just didn't show that the first 2 years. Has it happened in the past with other teams or other players where rookie season wise, they didn't have an alpha season, and then they still didn't have that great year 2, right? But then the year 3 wide receiver used to be a thing in fantasy football. And so, it is possible. But let's just take a look at Marvin Harrison Jr. and just some of the trades that have gone down with Marvin Harrison Jr. in fantasy football. And I'm pulling this data from Dynasty Daddy. And when you take a look at some of the recent trades that Marvin Harrison Jr. has been involved in, you're going to see some of these trades are, not worth having discussions or talking too much about. Because, people just make stupid trades. Marvin Harrison Jr. for a 2027 first. I would honestly say that 2027 class is supposed to be really, really good and much better than what this class is. Now, I say that with a grain of salt because one of my pet peeves in fantasy football is individuals that kind of poo-poo the current class and talk about the class after. But in this case, the 2027 class is going to be really good. Now, this class that we have here in 2026, and we're going to provide a lot of content over this offseason about the rookie class. But, this class this year in 2026, it's very top heavy. There's not a lot of depth. We were blessed last year. There was so much depth in fantasy football last year for, the rookies coming in. We aren't going to see that likely this year. And in 2026, it's very top heavy. There's not a ton of depth, and there's also just not really many elite players. Now, when I look at this, if I'm being offered a 2027 first round pick, for Marvin Harrison Jr., I would ideally like to maybe get, buy a cheap player, and get that in addition to that. I don't obviously know how high that is. If it's a late 2027 first for Marv, I would pass on that. I would probably like to maybe get a third kicked in, on top that maybe would be more comfortable. This is half PPR, start 9, 2 quarterback league, so it is a super flex. But ideally, I would probably like a little bit more. But I would also say if you have the depth at the wide receiver position, I'm also okay with making this deal if you have Marv. Now, this is a little nicer and cleaner because we know this is the 109 for Marv. The 109, and you give up Marv and the 406. Okay, I'm looking for a little. Now, this person acquired it, but it doesn't matter. We're evaluating both sides here. But I would still, even with the 109, this is a top heavy class, guys. I would want maybe a 2027 second thrown in, right? That would make me feel better. The 109, being that it's so top heavy, now we're going to get into this class more and more as the offseason goes on. But honestly, the 109, this is a deal that I would pass on. I think we're selling Marv a little too low right now. And it's going to lead me to kind of talking at the end, right? And then we're going to move to the next player. Is Marv a buy, sell, or hold right now? But let's go through a couple more of these trades. Marvin Harrison in a second for AJ Barner and Ladd McConkey. This I would do on the Ladd side. I would trade Marv and a 2 for Ladd and AJ Barner. A case scenario where 2 guys had down years, but we saw Ladd McConkey is an elite target earner. And honestly, there was a lot of dysfunction with that offense this year, with the offensive line beat up, with Herbert beat up, with new faces coming in. Honestly, I would take this. I like AJ Barner as an interesting little piece. It's also tight end premium, which makes it a little bit better. And this is also best ball, which is also kind of nice to have a guy like AJ Barner because there are weeks he can blow up, even if you're not comfortable starting him consistently on a week in, week out basis. Now, there are some questions in the chat. I'm about to get to those once I loop and close out this segment here with Marvin Harrison Jr. Let's take a look at this next one here. JSN and a 2027 second round pick for Marv, Chuba, and a 2027 first. This is a smash on the JSN side. I wouldn't think twice about this. I don't care what the projections are for how high these picks are. JSN should be valued as a top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty right now after this season. So, yeah, I mean, that's a smash on the JSN side. Now, to close out Marv, and then I'm going to get to some of the questions here in the chat. Marvin Harrison for me is a hold, right? Marvin Harrison for me is a hold. I'm willing to sell him if people still view him and are willing to overpay for him. I'm not going out there really and buying Marv, right? The situation is murky. We have a quarterback change, very likely, and a head coach change, an entire overhaul of the staff. And you also have a new guy that is now blooming into a possible star, right? When I look at it, it's elite, superstar, star, right? That's usually, and then you kind of have good and then average players below that. I'd say Michael Wilson is getting to that star level, not superstar, not elite, but what we saw this year with the production, with his high profile being, he was not like a late round, 5th round pick, like he was highly drafted. All of that, the fact that he's blooming into something. Trey McBride is a beast. I wouldn't go out there and buy Marv with how murky the situation is right now. He's a hold for me. I'm okay selling him if somebody's willing to pay, a really solid price for him. He's a player I wouldn't want to do a first round pick swap for unless it's like a top 5 pick in the first this year coming up. I'd rather do like a player for player swap for him than, acquiring, like I said, that 109 for Marv. I wouldn't trade Marv for the 109. It's too sketchy at the back end of the rookie class right now. Now there's a lot of time. But that's kind of where I'm at right now. Let's take a look at some of these questions that we have here, and then we'll get to the next player. Cooper said, what's the outlook on Josh Jacobs? So Josh Jacobs, spoiler alert, is one of the players that we're going to talk about on this list of players today. He's in the top 5 in this past 7 days of players that have been traded. So we are going to talk about him shortly. Corey said, I'm going to unload Bryce Young shares for whatever I can get. Honestly, I'm with you. I'm totally okay moving off Bryce Young. Bryce Young, there's just a weird timing with him, with his throws. And I'm a big believer in David Canales. If it was between Canales and Bryce Young for one of those guys staying, it would not surprise me if they moved off of Young before they moved off Canales. I think they like Canales. I think he's done a nice job with this roster this year. In spite of, I don't think Bryce Young has really played that great. They won a really weak division I don't even think they had a 500 record. They were 8-9 maybe. The NFL's so weird now with 17 games. There's no 8-8 teams now. It's 8-9. So yeah, I'm okay with unloading Bryce Young. He's a sell for me if people are I don't know how much higher his value can go. Now maybe you sit there and say, hey, I'm going to keep him until the end of the playoffs, because I don't think Bryce Young's value drops if they lose this playoff game against the Rams. It can only go up, though, right? If they perform well in the playoffs, maybe they rattle off a win against the Rams and shock them. They did it at home already once this year. So I would probably wait to see at the end of this weekend, unless someone's giving you a really sweet deal. But I'm totally okay moving off of Bryce Young. I'm just not the biggest believer right now. Is JSN a sell high? It just really depends on what you have for him. But honestly, JSN, unless your team is gutted and you can get a really, really phenomenal deal, I don't move off of like JSN is moving into that young cornerstone piece territory where he's a player that you can build a roster around, right? He's young. He's given us an elite season, not even just an elite season. Like, can't take anything away. The breakout is here. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So I wouldn't say JSN's a sell for me unless, when I have players like that are elite cornerstone, and if there was any way I'm moving off them, which I never advocate to do, but unless you have a really bad roster, it would have to be a tier down plus, I'm talking like a top pick. Like if you were to say, hey, I'm going to trade JSN for Emeka Egbuka, and you're going to also get like a young, like an Amaron Hampton. Emeka Egbuka, Amaron Hampton for JSN. I could entertain that if your roster's really bad. But it has to be like a tier down and then a young promising player that's shown it at least a little bit, like an Amaron Hampton and an Egbuka, right? Like that would be the kind of thing. And then I'd still probably ask for like a third, right? People don't realize second and third round pick hit rate is not that different, right? So I always try to get those third round picks thrown on top too, because people don't value them as high. Let's see. Corey said whoever traded JSN in a 2027 second for Marv Chupa and a 2027 first is bad. I completely agree. I would not advocate for doing that. Jamie, I'm going to get to your question, then we're going to move over to the next player, which is going to be BTJ. Jamie said, would you trade away Travis Etienne for DK Metcalf? Also, would you trade away Jaden Higgins to get Etienne? So, interesting question here. I'd rather Etienne over DK Metcalf. I think Rodgers comes back next year, but Metcalf, the ceiling has been hit for him, right? It can't get much higher. Travis Etienne has had a phenomenal year. He could very well come back. He's going to get a good contract most likely next year. And Travis Etienne, he's had a great season. So for me, honestly, like I'm okay buying him. Travis Etienne, his age, I think he's like 26. I'm pulling it up right now. But we're talking about a first round pick. He's 26 years old right now. He'll be 27 next year. If you're a competitive team, right, this is a player that I'm okay buying. If you're in a rebuild, sure, I'm fine moving Travis Etienne. He's going to turn 27 next year, right? If you can get someone to buy high off him, I would even be comfortable waiting to see if he signs like with a Kansas City or with a team that needs a running back. This is a really good free agents class. A lot of good veterans out there. But I would prefer ETN over Metcalf in a vacuum just because I think Metcalf has kind of hit his ceiling. Jaden Higgins to get ETN. If you're in a rebuild, I would like to do this, but I would need a pick back. I love Jaden Higgins. Huge Jaden Higgins fan. I had Jaden Higgins as a top 5 player out of the wide receivers in this class coming in. Things changed once landing spots happened. I preferred some landing spots a little bit better than his. But I love Jaden Higgins. I think he's a really good player, especially for a rebuild. I would love to get Jaden Higgins and maybe a 2-back. I don't think that's asking for a ton, given what ETN's done this year. I think that's a pretty fair deal to ask. I would need a pick added on to that deal. I wouldn't move ETN for Higgins straight up. And I love Higgins, but I just wouldn't do it straight up. If you guys have any other questions, continue to send them through. Make sure you hit that like button. If you're not subscribed already, please do so. I appreciate you guys tuning in during tonight, which is a pretty hectic night right now with all things considered with the college football games on. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Let's get on to the next player here. And the next player, like I said, Brian Thomas Jr. He was tied with Marvin Harrison Jr., 2 juniors here. He was tied with Marvin Harrison Jr. for the most traded player in the past week. So Brian Thomas Jr., man, I mean, talk about a crazy situation, with the Jacksonville Jaguars, with Travis Hunter. Now Parker Washington is stepping up. This is a very, very interesting room of wide receivers and players. Jacoby Myers gets an extension. Brian Thomas Jr., 23 years old, right? Had a great season. We are like 5 months removed from, Brian Thomas Jr. being viewed as a top 10 dynasty asset. When you look at Brian Thomas Jr. now, and I'm not going to pull up Keep Trade Cut, but I'm going to take a look at Dynasty Data Lab. And Dynasty Data Lab shows startup ADP currently right now. We just talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. right now, startup ADP wide receiver 17. Brian Thomas Jr., man, where did he go? He's fallen to wide receiver 19 in startup ADP. This is a guy that was top 10, top 12 in terms of dynasty value, dynasty rankings. And this just shows how quickly things change. Now, Brian Thomas Jr. had a down year this year. We can all admit that. It was not a good year for him, right? And I think there was a lot of concern with Brian Thomas Jr., with Travis Hunter coming in. A lot of people said, Travis Hunter is going to be the alpha. And honestly, that could not have been farther from the truth. Now, Hunter did start to kind of pick up some steam, and then he got injured. But then they brought in Jacoby Myers, and Parker Washington broke out, right? And then you have Brenton Strange, who's became kind of a dude. But let's talk about Brian Thomas Jr., right? 14 games this year, 91 targets, 48 catches, 707 receiving yards, 2 total touchdowns. He had 8 less touchdowns this year compared to last year, 16.7 points per game as a rookie. It's hard to sit there and say 16.7 points per game as a rookie. How do you sit there and assume that he's going to regress this badly, right? I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. is a top 10 dynasty wide receiver. I also don't think Brian Thomas Jr. is outside the top 20 for dynasty wide receivers either. I know the situation is murky. You have Jacoby Myers with an extension. You have Travis Hunter, who was drafted high, that was expected to have a role on the offense. We are still not sure how big that is. Okay, people can say whatever they want about ramping him up and what they were going into a bye and that they were gonna have a master plan for Travis Hunter, and we saw Parker Washington get the elite slot snaps and he thrived, and now we're supposed to go to Travis Hunter. We don't know that. Okay, people can sit there and tell you that we knew that was going to happen. We have no idea, folks. Okay, with the splits on defense and offense, we do not know that for a fact with Travis Hunter. Okay. But we talk about Brian Thomas Jr. here. And Brian Thomas Jr. for me is a buy right now. Okay. This is a good time to buy Brian Thomas Jr. When you talk about Brian Thomas Jr. and all the fluff that is and all the helium that is around, this team with Parker Washington, who I happen to really like, Jacoby Myers, Travis Hunter, I think Brian Thomas is a buy for me right now. He's valued, I think I said, as the wide receiver 19 in Dynasty, right? I would rather Brian Thomas Jr. than Marvin Harrison Jr. I'd rather Brian Thomas Jr. over Rome Odunze. I know that sounds crazy, but, with Luther Burden possibly becoming a dude, Loveland, Rome, there's something off with that connection with him and Caleb this year. We saw elite production from BTJ. We haven't seen that with Rome Odunze. I like Rome Odunze, but we haven't seen that yet. So I would take BTJ over Rome. I would take him over Marv. I would take Ladd over Brian Thomas Jr. still. I think that's probably where I'd probably have him as around wide receiver 17. But I'll tell you, man, I mean, people are probably willing to sell him pretty low. Let's take a look at some of these recent trades with Brian Thomas Jr. Now, a 2027 first, second, third, we're going to pass on discussing this one because I need more context in terms of how are we talking projected to be the last pick in 2027 first. All those are late picks. That might change so I'm not going to touch this one. Let's try to look for a little bit easier ones here. Zay Flowers, the 102 and the 103 for Alec Pierce, CeeDee Lamb, Brian Thomas Jr. I would smash the Brian Thomas Jr. CeeDee Lamb side. Okay, when we talk about this draft class this year, I like Jeremiah Love. I like some of the players in this class, but it's top heavy, like I said. And I don't really view a lot of these guys as like elite blue chip prospects. CeeDee Lamb is still CeeDee Lamb, okay? Brian Thomas Jr. is still very talented. This is a first-round pick. Alec Pierce is a budding star who's about to get a big-time payday somewhere, whether it's with Indianapolis or it's somewhere else. Zay Flowers, I like Zay Flowers. I'm very intrigued to see what happens with this offense. I wish he was somewhere else. I know he actually technically had a really good season from a total fantasy points perspective. Zay Flowers, it's a really weird year, but I would smash the Brian Thomas Jr. side here. And it's not even just because of BTJ. I mean, the CeeDee Lamb and Alec Pierce. If you told me CeeDee Lamb, Alec Pierce, it's a lot. I don't think it's that crazy, but man, that's a lot of hope to hit on these. I mean, because when I look at this trade, right, Zay Flowers is young. You get two young players. If you're a rebuilder, you sit there and you say to yourself, yeah, I need to rebuild. I want young players. These guys are still young. I mean, CeeDee Lamb's not old. Alec Pierce is young. BTJ is young. He's also a 10-team league. So elite players matter that much more in a 10-man league. So I would smash the BTJ side there. Let's try to find a little bit easier one. This is an interesting one here. Brian Thomas Jr. or Quinshon Judkins. Obviously, Quinshon Judkins, ends up, I believe he broke his leg, his fibula. No, I don't think there was any tendon damage or any ligament damage. which is good news for Judkins. But Stefanski's gone. Quarterback situation is still murky there. That offensive line is horrendous. I would prefer Brian Thomas Jr. here. And people are going to sit there and probably scoff at that. But I'll take the guy who is in an offense that's ascending right now, that is insulated. Trevor Lawrence looks good. Liam Cohen ain't going anywhere after this awesome season. The offense is getting better. I would take Brian Thomas Jr. over Judkins. I'm not worried about the injury for Judkins, but that offensive line's a ticking time bomb, okay, for Cleveland. I implore you to go take a look at their offensive line. There's age concerns. They're running out of money over there. They don't have a coach. The quarterback situation's murky. And there's some good players next to Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. So I would prefer the BTJ side. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts on that one, but I would take BTJ over Quinshon Judkins, and that's probably not a popular opinion. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say I would prefer Brian Thomas Jr. Let's take a look and see. This one's easy. Brian Thomas Jr., Derrick Henry. Look, honestly, if you're a team that has a lot of depth at wide receiver, I would like a pick back, like Derrick Henry in a third for Brian Thomas if I was giving up BTJ for Derrick Henry in this situation. If you're a contender, Derrick Henry is an outlier. He's an exception to the rule. Okay, he looked great down the stretch, or not down the stretch completely, but he physically looks good. They might not have utilized him correctly, and that's also partially why there's going to be some regime changes over there. But I would probably prefer a pick added on to Derrick Henry here, like a third. But I'm okay if you're a contender. If you're not a contender, you take Brian Thomas all day here. Because there's no reason to have Derrick Henry on your team. Brian Thomas Jr. for the 105, I could be open to. We talked about how this is a top-heavy class. I would be okay taking a chance on rolling the dice if you had conviction of this class and who you think is going to fall to you, and you trust your gut to make that right pick. If you do not feel comfortable, if you're not somebody, who, does a lot of the research on your own, I probably would prefer BTJ here. But if you feel convicted that you can make the right pick and you like this class and you like who's projected to fall to you at 105, I'm okay rolling the dice there and taking a chance on BTJ. Let's wrap a bow on this one and let's move over to the next player. But in a nutshell, Brian Thomas Jr., for me, is currently a buy. As the wide receiver 19 in Dynasty, I think he's slightly undervalued. I had to take him over Marv, take him over Rome Odunze, behind Lab McConkey, I think is fair. But I would say that Brian Thomas Jr. is a buy for me right now. So let's move over to our third player. Let's take a look at some of the questions here. Jamie did say he'd be getting ETN and giving Higgins on that one. So that's different. I would take Travis Etienne in a trade for Jaden Higgins. I love Jaden Higgins. You're not giving up any extra capital, any extra resources in this one. ETN for Higgins straight up. I would take ETN. He's young enough. I mean, we're talking about 26 years old. He'll be 27 next year. You're looking at 27, 28, 29. 3 years, at least 2 years of top 10 production is still in the cards for ETN. And I like to look at Dynasty usually in 2 to 3 year windows. A lot of people are told you not to draft RJ Harvey this year because he was 24, and people are worried about what his value is going to be at his second contract when he's in 4 or 5 years. I think that's nonsense. RJ Harvey was arguably the MVP rookie pick. I know this is crazy. To say, and people are going to think that I'm nuts for saying this. RJ Harvey had 3 20-point games in the last 5 weeks of the season. If you look at all the rookies this year, he was the MVP rookie down the stretch for fantasy football, right? And if you were a contender and you needed running back help, he helped you this year push to go get a championship. So when talking about Travis Etienne and the running back age, we're seeing guys last longer. It's not that crazy to say. The NFL changes. Things happen. Teams are going to more committee approaches. We're not seeing bell cows. And in some ways, it stinks for fantasy because we're like, man, I just want one guy I can trust who's going to get 20 touches a game every single week. We're not seeing that nearly as much, but it's helping with longevity. And guys are catching the football more. So while they might not be getting as many touches, right, because they're in more timeshares, these guys that catch the football, they're taking less hits because they're in more open space. They're not, getting rolled up on in muddy piles, running in between the tackles as much. But they're also, getting us more points with doing less because they're catching passes out of the backfield. The NFL is changing, right? But ETN for Higgins in a vacuum, I'll take that. Yes, and I did actually talk about that, Jamie. BTJ, Kyron Lacy was hit. I don't know if they were best friends, but I know they were close. They were college teammates. I talked about that with Wyatt on his show that dropped this morning. I think that had something to do with it, right? He didn't seem like he was there mentally. Cardell Tate for BTJ, there is definitely conversation for that. I would be okay rolling the dice for Cardell Tate for BTJ. I am still doing my evaluations, right? It's a little bit early. I don't know how high I'm going to have Tate ranked, but I do like him from what I've seen so far. I'm okay. If you think you're going to get him and you like Tate, I'm okay with rolling the dice there for BTJ, giving BTJ up for Tate. Let's take a look at the third player that is most traded, and this is a spicy one. And that player is Luther Burden. Luther Burden, since last week, has been traded 87 times in fantasy football. Crazy, right? I mean, Luther Burden, it was an interesting year, right? Luther Burden did not do a ton. When we look at Luther Burden, he did not have this insane fantasy season where everyone's like, wow, like how can you not love Luther Burden for the future? But when you look at Luther Burden and down the stretch what he did, right, he was able to earn targets in this offense. Now, Rome Odunze was hurt, but I think DJ Moore is on his way out, which is going to open things up in this offense for a guy like Luther Burden. And when you look at Luther Burden and the target rate, right, these are routes run, right? Player Profiler shows the routes run, and this is the percentage of times he was targeted on those routes run. This is elite. This is very, very high. This might actually be routes run rate, maybe in terms of the total routes in the actual offense. So pause there. That was a mistake by me. But when you look at the actual targets, and I don't have the data up in front of me, I can pull it if you guys want it. But Luther Burden was out targeting players in this offense before Rome Odunze went down. 6 targets, 7 targets, 9 targets. Obviously, he had that awesome game against San Francisco. 14 points prior to that, 11 points. What does it all mean, right? I mean, when you sit there and you say, Pete, like, okay, he had a good end of the season. What does it all mean? Everybody on Twitter, everybody on fantasy sites are talking about Luther Burden and should we be high on this guy? The answer is yes. Okay, you should be high on this guy. Luther Burden was an interesting prospect when I looked at him last year at Missouri. I loved Luther Burden coming into his senior season. And then I kind of, I got a little bit, the goggles got put on where I kind of got a little blurry. I started to look at other players' tape. I started to like other players. I had Jaden Higgins ranked higher than him coming out. I had Jaden Higgins at 4, and I had Burden at, I believe, 5 or 6 pre-draft. But Luther Burden, I mean, twitchy athlete, right? This is a guy that when you want players to have that game-breaking, week-winning ability, he is a player that you look at. He has that kind of makeup, right? A 40-yard dash, college dominator rating in the 75th percentile. His target share in college, 26.9%, which is really, really good. And a really young breakout age, right? We're talking about 18 years old, this kid broke out, which is 94th percentile in college. So the makeup is there. We know this kid is athletic. The Sammy Watkins comparison's a little bit interesting. I don't see it in some ways. Look, Sammy Watkins was amazing off the line of scrimmage. I don't love that comparison. Player Profiler does a really good job with their comps. But I'm not in love with the Sammy Watkins one. Maybe I'll watch some tape on both guys and see that. I'm curious to see what Player Profiler, whoever has this rank here, or most comparable player here, whoever does that here at Player Profiler, I'm curious to see what they saw, because I don't know that I see Sammy Watkins, but regardless, this is a team where Caleb Williams just broke the passing record, right? He was able to throw the football right in this offense with Ben Johnson. He gained confidence, he gained momentum down the stretch, and that should only help everybody else in this offense. Luther Burden is a hold for me. I don't know that I'm going and buying him right now because the price is probably extremely high. People are probably paying very, very high prices for Luther Burden. And look, I get it. I just think that the window to buy is somewhat closed right now. Now, I'm not saying it's completely closed and shut. There's going to be situations where, look, I mean, there are people play in leagues where people do stupid things. Luther Burden for Lake Corum. I mean, in what world this says? Okay, this is a 4-team league. I don't even know what the heck this is. 4-team league, start 13, 2 quarterback, full PPR. It just sounds like a fuck around league with a bunch of friends then that just did something for fun and people are just doing stupid stuff. Luther Burden, a 203, a 202 for Marvin Hampton and Rashid Shaheed. I would take the Luther Burden side here. You got 12-team league, full PPR, tight end premium, start 10. The 202, 203 is nice. I think Luther Burden for Amara and Hampton is close. I would take Hampton in a vacuum over Luther Burden if it was just for the two. But getting the picks on top, Rashid Shaheed, I don't know what he is with Seattle. I don't know if his contract is up or not. I have to take a look at that. But Luther Burden with the 202, 202, 203, it's a fair trade. I would be comfortable doing that. I would probably take the Luther Burden side there. If it was Luther Burden for Amara and Hampton straight up, I would take the Amara and Hampton side. Amara and Hampton, Kamani Vidal for Luther Burden and Breece Hall. I would take Luther Burden and Breece Hall side there. I mean, you get the awesome handcuff in Vidal with Hampton. And again, I talked about it. I would take Hampton over Burden straight. But if you're telling me I get Breece Hall, who's still a young asset, who's going to be a free agent, who could land in a really, really nice spot this year, I'm going to take Breece Hall and Luther Burden all day. So that's an interesting one as well. This one's a lot to unpack here. Burden and Gibbs for Javonte, Neighbors, and a bunch of picks. I would take Luther Burden and the Gibbs side. I mean, I would take Gibbs over Malik Neighbors here. A decent amount. I would say Gibbs is a notch up above Neighbors, right? Neighbors, we're hearing, there's doubt that he could be ready for week 1 next year. I trust Gibbs' situation. I trust the team. I trust the environment. I trust the offense. We still got to see what Malik Neighbors does. It could be really exciting with the Giants do. It could be really exciting if they bring in Stefanski or John Harbaugh. I love Malik Neighbors. It's not a slight. I'll just take the healthy player in Gibbs. And yeah, I'll take him over Neighbors. And then really it's Burden for Javonte and a bunch of picks. And I would take Burden there as well. So, I mean, in this case, I guess I'm buying Burden for a lot of these prices. So I know I talked about how he's a hold for me. He's a hold, but a buy if you can get him for a good price. So let's take a look at this one. Jahmyr Gibbs, J.J. McCarthy for Burden, the 101, and Judkins. So let's just assume Jeremiah Love is the 101 here. J.J. McCarthy, I value him as like an early second-round pick in Dynasty Superflex right now. J.J. McCarthy in startups. Let's take a look at the ADP, and we'll take a look at Luther Burden's ADP as well. Let's take a look at JJ McCarthy. So Jacoby's here. So we scroll up a little bit. So JJ is valued at, quarterback 23 and sandwiched in between the 111. Something doesn't look right here. I'm missing some. Oh, okay. It's going this way. Duh. Between the 110 and the 111 is where they project him. So they're viewing him as a late first, early second. Look, if I can get a late first for JJ McCarthy, I'd be doing it all day right now. I think most people you talk to are going to not want to pay that, to be completely honest with you. But let's go back to Luther Burden. And he's got to be close. Yeah, wide receiver 24. He's ahead of Zay Flowers. I'm good with that. I like Zay Flowers a lot, and I know he had a great year, but the ceiling is higher for Burden in this offense with the consistency. They have him ahead of J-Mo. I'm good with that. They have him ahead of A.J. Brown. I'm good with that. T. Higgins. I'm kind of good with that. I'm sorry. Again, we're reading it backwards. Burden is behind all of these guys. So I would slide Burden up right about here, right about wide receiver 20. Behind T. Higgins is about where I'd have him. T. Higgins is with Burrow, just signed the extension. He's not going anywhere. When Higgins is healthy, he's a stud too. I would have him Burden ahead of AJ. I would trade AJ for Burden, and if you can get a pick back, I would be comfortable doing that. I'd say Burden's probably somewhere about 20 for me. And I'd say he's really a hold for me, but I guess he becomes a buy if you can get him at some of these prices that we're seeing, that we showed so far. Let's take a look. We got two more players, and then, if you guys have any more questions, let me know. There was a question about Josh Jacobs, and he is the next player. So Josh Jacobs was traded 78 times over the past week. Josh Jacobs, it's not surprising he was traded so much. I think season's over. Dynasty managers are trying to get out from under him because they're worried. And I get it. The age is catching up. The injuries are catching up a little bit this year with Josh Jacobs. And this is a bell cow guy. He's 27. He's going to be 28 by the start of next year. And it's a bell cow guy. This is a guy that touches the ball a ton in his career. When you take a look, he's had no less than 36 receptions since 2020. So 54, 53, 37, 36, 36. And then when you look at the rush attempts, 234 this year, 301 the year before that, 233 the year before that, and he only played 13 games, so he missed time. He would have had more. 340, 217, 273. This is a guy that's missed he's missed a handful of games each, almost every year of his career. He's touched the ball a ton. Josh Jacobs is interesting, though. 14 touchdowns this year, 16 the year before. Manuel Wilson's a solid handcuff behind him. And he's getting up there in age and the injuries. I honestly, I think Josh Jacobs is a sell for me right now. I hate to say it because I really like Josh Jacobs. And when I try to talk about buy, sell, hold, I try to take into account, what are people paying for guys, and, what is their value when they're selling. I think you can still get decent value for Jacobs. He's more of a hold to sell. I'm holding him. Unless you can get a good offer. I'm not buying him. I would want to see what happens in this draft. I want to see what happens in free agency. When we look at Josh Jacobs' contract and with the Packers, let's take a look. So he signed a 4-year, $48 million contract in 2024. So year one, year two. And a potential out. So it seems like, that's not a lot of guaranteed money, folks. $12 million guaranteed. The potential out was this year with a $9.375 million cap hit. don't misunderstand me. I don't think the Packers are going to move on from Josh Jacobs. I think they like him. Think he fits their play style. I don't think he's extremely expensive. But when we talk about insulation, right, and we talk about dynasty, insulation is important. Not a lot of guaranteed money left on the deal. That's something that you worry about. Let's take a look at him on Spot Track, right? First round pick in 2019, 24th overall out of Alabama. So he's an unrestricted free agent in 2028. And going into year 3 of his deal with Green Bay, dead cap hit team would save $8 million and they'd eat $6 million. I don't think it happens this year. I think if they were going to move on from Jacobs, it would probably be next year. But you see what the team did. Base salary was really low the first 2 years. There was a big signing bonus of $12 million. And a guaranteed at signing was also $12.5 million. And so he pretty much got all his most of his guaranteed money at signing, I believe. But that doesn't make sense because the dead cap hit. Okay, so interesting. I'm not a capologist, but I guess I'm a little confused how Spot Track has this year because he signed total guaranteed $12 million. But after year 1, in year 2, this year, they're saying dead cap would be $15 million if they cut him, which is confusing because if the guaranteed money was only $12.5 million, not exactly sure. So whatever. No big deal. Let's take a look at the recent trades for Josh Jacobs and go over some of these really quick. And as I said, overall, number 4th most traded player in fantasy football or in dynasty football right now. And number 1 running back that's being traded at the moment. So let's take a look at Jacobs. This one's interesting. This went down today in a tight end premium 0.5, 10-team league, 2 quarterback, 109 and George Kittle for Jacobs and the 204. Now, I would rather the Jacobs side here. I love George Kittle. Both guys are up there in age. Tight ends do age better. Kittle has had issues staying on the field. He did sign an extension. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be really good in this offense. But the 109 to the 204 is not a huge drop off. We talked about how top heavy this class is. And in a vacuum, I'll take Josh Jacobs over George Kittle in many cases. Now, if you're a rebuilder, sure, go Kittle and the 109. And then you try to flip Kittle to somebody else. I just feel like with Jacobs and the 204, honestly, it's not a bad deal. I mean, Jacobs in the 204 should net you about the 108, 109. To get Kittle on top, that's pretty fair. Saquon Barkley for Josh Jacobs is very interesting because Saquon Barkley is the next player we're going to talk about. So I'll refrain from kind of talking a little bit about this one. We'll talk about this one when we show Saquon, and because this trade's going to pop up when we go to him. Josh Jacobs for Ja'Cory Crossing-Meyer in the 206. Give me Josh Jacobs. This is selling too low on Jacobs. If people are selling Jacobs for this, I'm buying. I'm buying Jacobs at that price. Jacobs for the 110, kind of what we talked about before. He's, probably valued at about a late first, giving up the 204 up there, and Jacobs to get the late first plus Kittle is a good deal. Jacobs for the 110 is solid. I'm fine doing that if you're a rebuilder. I would encourage somebody to maybe try to get a 2027 pick added on. If you're somebody who's comfortable, if you're accepting the rebuild and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to be good this next year coming up in 2026, then I would shoot for a 2027 pick, because while I don't always advocate for that, if you're a rebuilder and you're moving off of Jacobs, who's an aging asset at running back, who's dealing with some injuries, if you're a rebuilder and the team's bad enough, then I would go and go grab a 2027 if possible. Now, it's a top-heavy class, though. Josh Jacobs for the 110, me personally, I would probably rather a player. I know a lot of people love picks. Everybody loves draft picks. But I would like to get a proven player back. Maybe a Tyler Algier and the 110. Can I get that? Can you get a dart throw young player who maybe had a down year as a rookie plus the 110 for Jacobs? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not talking about like Matthew Golden, but maybe we're talking Trey Harris and the 110 for Jacobs. Maybe we're talking Bryce Tootin and the 110 for Jacobs. Now we're talking, right? But I typically what I'm probably going to refrain from is trading proven assets like Jacobs for late firsts with this top heavy of a class. I prefer getting a proven player. Now this is a smash sell. 103 for Jacobs. You're probably not getting that in most cases. If you can get that, absolutely, I would take that in a heartbeat. Let's see. Is there another one? 104 for Jacobs, 107 for Jacobs. I would take that. 2 firsts for Jacobs is crazy. I mean, you're starting to see. I mean, look, there are people out there. Luther Burden in the 210 for Jacobs and 204. I would take Luther Burden in a heartbeat. So yeah, I mean, maybe Jacobs is I already talked about him being a sell. That was what I said. I said he was a sell. But for these prices, it's good to kind of take a look at the market. And that's why we're going to do this show every single week, because it's going to give you an idea like, holy crap, man, like people are really selling. Like this is not just like a one-off. Like there are a lot of people selling Jacobs for in that threshold of, that 104 here. We're talking like mid first to early first. Like, I mean, sure, if I can get that, I'll take it all day. So that's going to do it for Josh Jacobs. And then let's move over to our last guy here. And it's going to be Saquon Barkley, who is the number 2 most traded running back. He's the number 5 most traded player. And Saquon Barkley, man, this is a really, really tough player to talk about. Albert, what's going on? Alex, what's going on? Appreciate you, fellas. Make sure you hit that like button before you guys head on out of here. But Saquon Barkley is a really, really tough player to talk about here because Barkley is a guy that, Barkley is a player at 28 years old, turning 29, had a down year, right? 14th in points per game, 14.5 points this year. He had 1,100 yards, 9 total touchdowns. Touched the ball much less, right? 280 attempts versus 345 attempts during the regular season last year. 4 more catches, but still he touched the ball less. So that's some good news. That's the good news with Saquon. His tread on the tires was a little bit less this year, right? The other good news for Saquon is there's no way Kevin Patullo comes back. And the one thing that Nick Sirianni has done a good job with is when he's fired a guy, the next guy's been really good. And then that next guy usually goes and gets another jump. Kellen Moore, Shane Steichen, and those guys, and then you had Brian Johnson, I think it was. And then now you have Kevin Patullo. Now, Philly has this thing where, they're an attractive place. There's going to be a coordinator that is going to be attracted to going them. Maybe it's Todd Monken, right? Who is on the outs with the Ravens, right? So you get a coordinator upgrade, maybe it gets better for Saquon. I still think he's a sell. I don't even think he's a hold to sell. I think he's just a sell. Unless you can get him really cheap. If someone's look, there were people selling CMC for second round picks last year. I got CMC for a second last year. If you can get Saquon Barkley for a 2, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if the market pushes down on him that hard, sure. But let's take a look at least where Saquon is valued right now in startups. In startups, you look at Saquon. And Saquon Barkley is currently the RB14 in startups, right next to Brian Thomas Jr. And we actually talked about Saquon Barkley and Brian Thomas Jr. There was a deal that went down between the two of these guys. I would take Brian Thomas Jr. all day. Now, based on this, now make sure I'm reading it right. He is valued between the 104 and the 105. Now, I don't necessarily think that Saquon Barkley, you're getting the 104, 105 for him. I mean, but I said the same thing about Josh Jacobs. So I don't want to speak too soon because we saw a lot of picks for Josh Jacobs that were early firsts. I think Saquon's probably somewhere closer to like that 107 to 110-ish is normally where you're going to see him get traded. I think for me, I wouldn't pay more than, the 111, 112 for Saquon. And I'd have to be a contender. And those people that are in that 111, 112 spot are probably coming off a great season because that's why they have the 111, 112 unless they traded for it. Or they are a rebuilder that ended up acquiring that pick from a contender that was pushing and they gave up their first. It's very possible as well. But if I'm a contender, I could see a world where you say, hey, you know what, I'm going for it again next year. I'll trade my 111, 112 for Saquon. Okay, you could do that. But this is an asset that you really probably need to get out from under. Let's take a look at some of the trades here. Ozayo, I'm going to get to your question in just a moment. Saquon Barkley, some recent trades for him. And then I'm actually going to talk because I did trade Saquon Barkley a couple weeks back. Before the day of the Bears-Eagles game where the Bears absolutely throttled the Eagles on the ground. So Saquon Barkley for 2027 first, kind of hard to talk about. I don't know how late that first is, but I'm probably going to sit there and tell you, yeah, I would probably take that because I would take the first because it's projected to be a really good class. And I'm already telling you that Saquon Barkley, the most I would give up for him is a 111, 112, and that's if I'm a contender with a really, really good team. So, yeah, 2027 first-round pick. I don't know where it is, but I would probably say in a vacuum, I would take that. Saquon Barkley for 2028 first and a 305 in 2026. I probably wouldn't take this. I'm just not one of those guys that I don't love trading for a pick in 3 years. The league could fold. I mean, so in general, this is not a deal I'm doing. Saquon Barkley for Zach Charbonnet, Wan'Dale. I would take Barkley still here. I do like Wan'Dale. He's a buy of mine. Charbonnet is a hold for me. I'm not pushing a ton for him to go acquire him. I'm not paying a ton. Now, Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. I would take Josh Jacobs here. Josh Jacobs and Saquon. We talked about what Saquon right now is valued as the running back 14. That means Josh Jacobs is probably valued. Yeah, he's valued as the running back 18 right now, Josh Jacobs. I guess people sit there and say to themselves, actually, I would probably take Saquon over Jacobs. We're talking about two players that are up there in age. They're practically the same age. The difference is Saquon is a player that I think still has the ability to have game-breaking ability, whereas Jacobs, that play is going to translate to him being a guy that just scores a fuck ton of touchdowns at his old age, but doesn't compile a ton of yards. That's probably where he gets to. Where Saquon can still be a compiler, I think, and that offense is probably going to be better next year. So I'm okay with that. Let's take a look at one or two more here. Yeah, Burden and a 2027 second for I would take Burden. We talked about that, I think, before when we went over Burden's trades. Barkley for Addison in the 106. Yeah, I mean, if I need wide receiver help, I'm okay. I'm okay taking that on the Addison and the 106 side there. Chase Brown and Chimere DK and Saquon. I would take the Chase Brown side. Yeah, I'd take the Chase Brown side. All All right, let's take a look at the chat here. We got one more question. We answered a couple before. If you guys have anything else, make sure you let me know before I sign off here. But Ozayo said, I got offered the 109 for this year and a 2028 first rounder for Rashee Rice. Do I take it? I'm a contender and I finished third this year. No. It's 2 firsts for Rashee Rice. Now, there are some things that have just came out about Rashee Rice that I want to be delicate about talking about because I just don't know. It doesn't look great, right? There's potential with his wife or girlfriend. There's some allegations right now that came out about Rashee Rice a couple hours ago. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what it means if it is true and there are charges. I don't know what it means with his prior case, how that affects him. Could he see jail time? I don't know. But in a vacuum, if I did not know that happened, because I don't know what's going to happen, I would say this is still not enough for me. This is a top-heavy rookie class. The 109 is still, a little up and down. Sorry, misspoke. The 109 is kind of far from the top-end talent on this draft, and it's going to be kind of sketchy. And then you're talking about a first in 2028. If you can tell me, hey, that first is going to be 2027, and I can get a little bit of an earlier first-round pick this year, I would take it. I'm probably not taking this, though. I want a tier down here. If I'm moving Rashee Rice, I need a proven player, okay? Too many times we trade proven, very good assets. Forgetting about the legal stuff that might happen with Rashee Rice. But too many times we sit here and we try to trade these good players for picks. And the picks are sexy. It's exciting. Everybody loves to draft rookies. I get it. I love to draft rookies. I can't blame you for wanting more picks. Everybody wants picks. But in a draft that's not top heavy, you're not getting the first is in 2028. It's not even next year for the second first. I need a proven commodity. I need a proven player. You tell me it's Rashee Rice and for BTJ and a first next year, I might entertain that if I'm panicking a little bit with what's going on. I think you can hold tight right now because the good news is it's probably going to take some time for whatever's happening to get settled. Look how long it took the last time. Now, the last time, domestic violence is pretty cut and dry for the NFL with their rulings and stuff. They have a plan in place for how they discipline for that. So it's going to have the verdict will come down faster for that, but you still have some time. So I wouldn't panic on him. Michael Wilson, I did see you just sent that in. Michael Wilson is a player that I would definitely love to get Michael Wilson. If you're talking Rashee Rice for Michael Wilson and that first is higher, if I can get a first that's in the top 5, top 5 first plus Michael Wilson and maybe a third next year or 2 next year, I would entertain that. But again, I wouldn't panic too much. Rashee Rice right now is valued in startups. Now, again, this is not taking into account what's gone on potentially today, but in startups, Rashee Rice is viewed between the 101 and the 102, right? So we're talking about you need to get that kind of value. Michael Wilson, I love Michael Wilson. He's probably viewed right now as a high-end 2, and you're getting a 109. That doesn't make up for the gap enough for me to get up higher. So appreciate you coming in. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you're not already. And yeah, hopefully you come in next time. Jamie said, are you getting a co-host for the stock market show? Can't remember who did this last season, but I think Chev was the co-host. Chev did do some shows. I know Alex did this on Player Profiler Now. I'm going to probably ride this out solo for a couple of shows. There's going to be some guests that come on, and there is a possibility that I get a permanent co-host on this, which might make it more entertaining. For now, we're going to probably do it solo. Guests will start to kind of filter in and out, and we'll see. I like doing the shows solo, but it's also fun to kind of have some back and forth between somebody else, and you get to hear a little bit more of a debate, between me and somebody else, maybe if they disagree, with my point of view, which is also nice. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Jamie, thank you so much. Azoyo, Albert, Alex, all the other questions, Corey, Cooper, Cameron Myers, Dynasty Dave. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you're not already. I'll be back next week, and have a good rest of the night.